My son leaned over and whispered, "Don't embarrass us, just eat," when I reached for the wrong fork. I'm Samson Brown, 62 years old, and those whispered words started the worst night of my life. Derek thought he was protecting his reputation by quietly correcting his sick, confused father at dinner. What he didn't realize was that his harsh whisper was just the beginning. Within an hour, he'd be publicly humiliating me in front of 50 strangers, calling me delusional and confused, and none of them knew that every table, every server, every brick in that restaurant belonged to me. See, I'd been hiding my terminal cancer diagnosis for 5 months. I'd also been hiding the fact that I owned an $18 million restaurant empire that Derek was about to inherit. Some conversations start with whispers and end with explosions. Some nights change everything forever. If you've ever been hurt by family, hit subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. This story might help you feel less alone. This is how one whispered insult led to the destruction of everything my son thought he knew. To understand what happened that night, you need to know how Derek saw me in those final months. 5 months earlier, Derek had watched me fumble with a fork at a family gathering. The chemotherapy had affected my fine motor control. Simple tasks had become embarrassing struggles. "Dad, here, let me help," he'd said, quickly switching my utensils to the correct positions. His tone wasn't kind. It was mortified. That was the beginning of Derek's new approach to our relationship, damage control. The first major incident happened at his company holiday party in December. Derek worked as a marketing executive downtown, pulling a 6-figure salary he was very proud of. He'd reluctantly invited me, then spent the evening managing my interactions like I was a liability. When his boss asked what kind of work I did, Derek stepped in immediately. "My father's retired. Health issues, you know?" Health issues. Not my father built a business empire. Not he's a successful entrepreneur. Health issues. When that same boss mentioned restaurant investments later, Derek physically guided me away from the conversation. "Dad doesn't really follow business anymore," he'd explained with practiced sympathy. "I own 22 restaurants, generating $23.7 million annually. But Derek had decided I was too sick and confused to follow business. The second warning sign was financial. We'd had lunch at a small cafe carefully chosen by Derek because it wasn't too fancy for my condition, and I'd left a generous tip for excellent service. Derek grabbed my wrist as we left. "Dad, $50 on a $15 meal? You can't just throw money around anymore." What Derek didn't know was that every month I transferred $3,200 into his checking account. I'd been doing it for nearly 4 years, 47 payments totaling $150,400, money that paid his BMW lease, his downtown apartment rent, his designer clothes, the same designer clothes he wore while lecturing me about fiscal responsibility. Derek's identity had become wrapped up in being the successful one, the responsible son managing his declining father, having a parent who appeared weak, who moved slowly, who sometimes shook from medication. That fit his narrative perfectly. What destroyed me wasn't Derek's embarrassment. It was his assumption that embarrassment was justified. October 15th, 2024. That's the day Dr. Elizabeth Carter delivered my pancreatic cancer diagnosis. Stage 4, 6 months, maybe 8 with aggressive treatment. "Mr. Brown, I recommend telling your family immediately. You'll need support systems in place." But I'd made a different choice. I decided to handle my death the same way I'd handled my life, protecting Derek from unnecessary burdens while arranging his future security. The business needed succession planning. Legal documents required completion. The restaurant empire I'd built from nothing needed smooth transition to Derek's ownership. I'd planned to tell him everything once the paperwork was finished. Hand him the keys to $18 million worth of assets, along with the truth about my condition. Instead, Derek spent those months cataloging my weaknesses. Every tremor became evidence of decline. Every quiet moment became proof of confusion. Every gentle correction became confirmation that he was now the adult managing the child. The irony was suffocating. Derek received more money from me monthly than most people earned in salary, yet he saw himself as my caretaker, generously accepting my help while managing my decline. I'd spent 34 years teaching Derek about hard work, respect, and gratitude. Apparently, I'd forgotten to teach him about assumptions. But March 22nd, 2025 was about to provide that lesson in the most brutal way possible. The medical timeline was accelerating faster than I'd expected. Dr. Carter's March 15th appointment, exactly 1 week before that disastrous dinner, had delivered sobering news. "Mr. Brown, the latest scans show more aggressive progression than we'd hoped,"
I'm revising my estimate to 8 to 12 weeks. 8 to 12 weeks. The 6-month timeline had collapsed to 2 or 3 months. Every day I delayed the inheritance conversation was another day closer to Derek discovering his father's death and his $18 million inheritance simultaneously. Through lawyers, through strangers, through the worst possible circumstances, Margaret Walsh had been sending increasingly urgent messages. Sam, we cannot delay the estate planning any longer.
Your health situation requires immediate legal action. The business valuation was complete. $18.2 million total enterprise value. 22 restaurant locations across Vermont, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts. Real estate holdings worth $12.4 million. Equipment, inventory, and operational assets adding $5.8 million. All of it designated for Derek in legal documents he'd never seen. But here's what kept me awake at night. Derek had no idea any of this existed. In his mind, I was a sick retiree living on Social Security, occasionally needing his help with expenses. If I died before completing the transfer, Derek would inherit a nightmare. Business partnerships he'd never heard of. Vendor relationships requiring immediate attention. 347 employees depending on leadership decisions from someone who thought restaurants were just service work. The empire would crumble while Derek figured out what he'd inherited. Meanwhile, I was running a multi-million-dollar operation from my home office, taking calls from general managers, reviewing daily receipts, approving major expenditures, all while Derek thought I spent my days watching television and taking medication. The deception was becoming impossible to maintain. Tony Rodriguez called that Tuesday before our dinner. Mr. Brown, the spring menu rollout is exceeding projections. Should we accelerate the marketing campaign? Approved. Increase the budget by 15%. Sir, that's an additional $47,000 across all locations. $47,000. I just approved a marketing spend larger than Derek's annual salary while he thought I needed guidance ordering lunch. The financial contradiction was staggering. Derek lectured me about $50 tips while I made daily decisions involving hundreds of thousands of dollars. But the emotional cost was worse. Every day Derek treated me like a burden was another day. My life's achievements were being erased by the person who mattered most. I'd built Brown family restaurants through 34 years of 16-hour days, calculated risks, and earned respect. Derek saw none of that history. To him, I was just a sick old man who sometimes got confused about money. The restaurant industry relationships I'd cultivated were invisible to him. The community reputation I'd built meant nothing. The innovation and leadership that had created an empire were dismissed as construction work or something. Time was running out on multiple fronts. My health was declining. The business needed transition leadership. Derek's ignorance was becoming dangerous to both his future and the company's stability. Most critically, our relationship was deteriorating daily. Every protective lie I told to spare him worry became another reason for him to see me as diminished. I was dying while watching my son lose respect for everything I'd accomplished. Something had to break. Either Derek would learn the truth about his father, or he'd lose the chance forever. March 22nd, 2025. I chose Brown's Steakhouse deliberately, our flagship location, where the most employees would recognize me, where the revelation would have maximum impact. If Derek was going to learn respect, it would happen publicly, dramatically, and unforgettably. I just didn't expect it to start with him whispering instructions about which fork to use. March 22nd, 2025, 7:15 p.m. The night that changed everything started with Derek trying to help. Dad, want to grab dinner? There's this place downtown Jenny from work recommended. The place was Brown's Steakhouse, our flagship location. The restaurant I'd opened in 1995 and visited every Tuesday for operational reviews. Through the back entrance, during off hours, when Derek would never see me. Derek had no idea. We arrived during peak Saturday dinner rush. The hostess, Sarah, recognized me immediately, but looked confused when Derek stepped forward. "Reservation for 2 under Derek Brown," he announced confidently. Sarah's hesitation was visible. She knew my face from my Tuesday office meetings, but had never seen me in the dining room during service hours. "Right this way, gentlemen," she said carefully, leading us to a center table. Perfect. Prime location with maximum visibility for what I knew was coming. Derek surveyed the restaurant like a first-time visitor. "Nice place. Jenny said they have excellent steaks." "The prime rib is outstanding here," I said quietly. "How would you know, Dad? You've never eaten here." Actually, I'd reviewed every menu item during development meetings, but explaining that would require conversations Derek wasn't ready for. As we settled in, Derek began his familiar routine of managing my public behavior. Dad, remember we talked about this? The dinner fork is the larger one on the left. He was right. I'd picked up the salad fork first. The chemotherapy had affected my attention to details like place settings. Thank you, I said softly. But Derek wasn't finished. He leaned closer and lowered his voice to a harsh whisper. Don't embarrass us tonight, okay? Just eat and let me handle the talking. The words hit like ice water. Don't embarrass us, just eat. My own son was giving me behavior instructions in my own restaurant. The waiter approached. Marcus, one of our best servers, 4-year employee. I'd personally approved his last raise to $18 per hour. Good evening, gentlemen. Can I start you with beverages? Derek immediately took control. I'll have the Cabernet Sauvignon, 2019. My father will have water. Actually, I said, I'd like to see the wine list. Derek's smile tightened. Dad, you're on medication. Water's better. Marcus looked between us uncertainly. Sir, would you like a few minutes to decide? Water's fine, Derek said firmly before I could respond. Marcus nodded and left. Derek turned to me with that practiced patience I'd been seeing more often. Dad, I'm just looking out for you. Alcohol and your medications don't mix. My medications. Derek was making medical decisions for me in front of restaurant staff who knew I regularly made business decisions involving millions of dollars. When Marcus returned with drinks, Derek launched into his introduction routine. Marcus, I'm Derek Brown, Regional Marketing Director at TechFlow Solutions. This is my father, Samson. He's retired due to health issues. Health issues. That's how Derek explained my life to my own employee. Marcus glanced at me with confusion. Your father seems very sharp, sir. Oh, he has good days and bad days. Tonight's a good day, thankfully. Good days and bad days. Derek was explaining my mental state to someone who'd seen me negotiate complex vendor contracts. I felt my hands begin to tremble. Not from medication this time. From rage. Derek, I said quietly, perhaps we should order. Of course, Dad. Take your time with the menu. No rush. Derek's condescending tone was attracting attention from nearby tables. The couple next to us had stopped eating to listen. I think I'll have the prime rib, medium rare, I said. Derek's face shifted to concern. Dad, that's $32, maybe something lighter. The chicken breast is only $22. Derek was managing my order based on a budget that existed only in his imagination, in my own restaurant, where I could order the entire menu without affecting my bank balance. I can afford $32, Derek. I know. I just want you to be careful with money. Fixed income and all. Fixed income. I had $4.7 million in liquid assets and a business generating $2. $3 million annually. But Derek thought I needed to avoid expensive entrees. Marcus was still standing there, increasingly uncomfortable. The prime rib is excellent, sir. One of our signature dishes. See, Dad. Order whatever makes you happy. Derek's permission to spend my own money in my own restaurant was the perfect setup for what came next. Because what Derek didn't know was that Tony Rodriguez, my general manager, was about to start his evening rounds. That Margaret Walsh, my attorney, was finishing dinner 3 tables away. That the ownership documents for every piece of furniture Derek was touching were sitting in my lawyer's briefcase. Prime rib, medium rare, I told Marcus. Excellent choice, sir. And your name for the order? Brown, Derek interrupted. Derek Brown. My father's Samson Brown. Marcus wrote carefully. 2 Browns. One who thought he was in charge, one who actually owned everything. Close enough, for now. While we waited for our entrees, the first cracks in Derek's worldview began appearing. He was too focused on monitoring my behavior to notice the signs. The promotion comes with a company car allowance, Derek said, cutting his bread with unnecessary precision. Finally won't need help with the BMW payment anymore. Help with the BMW payment. That's how Derek described the $3,200 monthly transfers I'd been making for 47 consecutive months. That's wonderful news, I said carefully. Yeah, it felt weird taking money from you anyway. At your age, every dollar should be going toward medical expenses. At my age, Derek had decided I was financially vulnerable, medically declining, and cognitively unreliable. The trifecta of assumptions that justified all his protective interventions. Our salads arrived, and Marcus set mine down with practiced familiarity. Sir, would you like your usual dressing on the side? Your usual. The words hung in the air like smoke. Derek's fork stopped midway to his mouth. Your usual? Dad. What does he mean? I watched Marcus's face carefully. The young man looked confused by Derek's sharp reaction. "I think I've had this salad before," I said mildly. "When? You said you'd never been here." "No, Derek. You said I'd never been here. I just agreed the prime rib was excellent." Derek set down his fork entirely. "Marcus, has my father eaten here before?" Poor Marcus looked like he'd walked into a family argument without warning. He glanced between Derek and me, clearly sensing danger. Well, I might have served him before." "When? How often?" "Derek," I interrupted softly. "Let the man work." But Derek was fully focused now. "It's a simple question. How often has my father been here?" Marcus looked directly at me, and I gave the slightest shake of my head. "Not yet. Let Derek figure this out himself." "I'm not really sure about specific visits," Marcus said diplomatically. "We serve many customers." Derek leaned back, frustrated but suspicious. "You seem to know his salad preferences pretty specifically for someone who might have served him before." The second seed was planted 15 minutes later when our entrees arrived. Tony Rodriguez appeared at our table during his evening management rounds. Tony had been with us for 4 years, recruited from a high-end Boston restaurant with a significant salary increase and profit-sharing package. "Good evening, gentlemen. How is everything this evening?" "Outstanding," Derek said immediately. "Great restaurant. I'll definitely recommend it." "Wonderful to hear," Tony replied professionally, then looking at me. "And sir, is your meal meeting your expectations tonight?" Meeting your expectations. The phrase was operational code Tony and I used during my Tuesday reviews. When he asked if something was meeting expectations, he was asking for my assessment of kitchen performance and service quality. "Perfectly prepared," I answered.
Please give my compliments to Chef Martinez. Derek's knife clattered against his plate. Chef Martinez? Dad, how do you know the chef's name? Tony's eyebrows rose slightly. He hadn't expected this question from someone's son. I noticed it mentioned somewhere, I said. No, you didn't. I've been reading everything on this table for 30 minutes. The chef's name isn't printed anywhere. Derek was absolutely right. We didn't include chef names on customer-facing materials, a policy I'd implemented to prevent competitor poaching. Tony shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Brown, perhaps... See? Derek interrupted. He knows your name too. Dad, what's going on here? Have you been coming here regularly? Have you been telling people stories about your successful son to get attention? The accusation was building towards something uglier. Derek's protective embarrassment was transforming into suspicion and anger.
"Derek, please keep your voice down," I said quietly, but other diners were already starting to notice. The business meeting at the corner table had paused their conversation. The elderly couple next to us was openly listening. Perfect. The more witnesses, the better. 2 seeds successfully planted. Derek was asking the right questions now. He just wasn't prepared for the answers that were coming. Derek's whispered concerns about my embarrassing behavior escalated into something far worse as the evening progressed. "You know what I think is happening?" Derek said, his voice rising above the dinner conversation whisper we'd started with. "I think you've been coming here alone, Dad, probably making up stories about having a successful son. The transformation from protective whispers to public accusations happened gradually, then all at once. Other tables were starting to notice. Derek, please lower your voice." "Why? Are you embarrassed? You should be." Derek's volume increased again. "How many times have you come here alone telling these people stories about your family to get sympathy?" A woman at the adjacent table gasped softly. The business meeting had stopped entirely. 4 men in suits watching our family crisis unfold. "I bet you tell them about your son, the marketing director, right? Maybe exaggerate how successful I am to make yourself feel important?" Derek's accusation cut deep. He thought I was living vicariously through his achievements while inventing my own. "Dad, you worked construction. There's no shame in that, but you can't keep pretending to be something you're not." Construction. Derek had reduced 34 years of business building to construction work, and was now publicly correcting my supposed delusions about it. My hands were shaking visibly, not from medication, from the effort it took not to respond while my son announced my professional failures to a roomful of strangers. "You want to know the truth about my father?" Derek said, loud enough now for half the restaurant to hear. His voice carried the authority of someone making an important announcement. "Derek, stop." "No, Dad. Someone needs to say this. You're sick, you're confused, and you're embarrassing both of us with this fantasy." Sick and confused. Derek had just publicly declared me mentally incompetent in front of 50 witnesses. I take care of him, Derek continued, addressing the nearby tables like he was providing a public service announcement. Pay his bills, manage his finances, make sure he gets to doctor appointments. But he repays me by coming here alone, spinning stories about being successful. The lies were breathtaking. Derek take care of me? Pay my bills? When I was transferring $3,200 monthly into his account? The really sad part is, I think he believes his own stories now. That's what happens with some older people. They start living in the past, making up achievements that never existed. A waiter dropped something in the kitchen. The crash echoed through the dining room like thunder. Every conversation had stopped. Every face was turned toward our table. Derek noticed the attention and seemed to feed off it. I'm sorry you all have to witness this. My father sometimes gets confused about where he is, who he knows. The medication affects his memory. He turned to Marcus, who'd been hovering nearby with obvious distress. I apologize for any confusion he may have caused earlier. He sometimes thinks he knows people when he doesn't. Sir, your father hasn't caused any, Marcus began. It's okay. He's not dangerous or anything. Just lives in a fantasy world where he's important and successful. It's actually kind of heartbreaking. The woman at the corner table was crying now. Actually crying. Derek's public humiliation of his elderly father was too cruel for her to watch silently. Derek noticed her tears and seemed to realize he'd gone too far. He reached across and patted my hand with condescending gentleness. Dad, I'm not trying to hurt you, but you can't keep doing this. You can't keep coming to nice places and pretending to be someone you're not. The patronizing tone was somehow worse than the accusations. Derek was now speaking to me like I was a confused child who needed gentle correction. These people work hard to build successful businesses, Derek continued, gesturing around the restaurant. It's not fair to them when you come in here and make up stories about being an owner or whatever fantasy you've created. An owner. Derek had just dismissed restaurant ownership as one of my impossible fantasies. My decision crystallized in that moment. Derek had crossed every line. He'd publicly humiliated me, called me delusional, invented stories about supporting me financially, and reduced my life's work to embarrassing delusions. All while sitting in my restaurant, talking to my employees and living off money generated by my business empire. Derek, I said quietly, you're absolutely right about one thing. Someone needs to tell the truth tonight. Good. I'm glad you're finally being realistic. The truth is that you have no idea who you're talking to. Derek's patronizing smile faltered. Dad, please don't start with the fantasy stories again. The truth is that you've been living off money from this restaurant for 4 years. What are you talking about? Dad, you're getting confused again. The truth is that you're sitting in my restaurant, talking to my employees, celebrating a promotion funded by my business. Derek's face went pale. Dad, this isn't your restaurant. You don't own anything, remember? We talked about this. I looked around the dining room. Every face was turned toward us. Perfect audience for what came next. Margaret? I called to the corner table where my attorney had been watching this entire scene unfold. Would you mind bringing those documents over here? Derek spun around as Margaret Walsh approached our table, carrying her distinctive brown leather briefcase embossed with Walsh and Associates in gold lettering. Who is that? Derek whispered, his confidence evaporating. That, I said calmly, is my attorney, and those are the inheritance documents I've been trying to discuss with you for months. Margaret reached our table and smiled with professional warmth. Good evening, Mr. Brown. Are you ready to proceed with the business transfer? Derek's mouth fell open. The entire restaurant was dead silent. Derek, I said softly, meet Margaret Walsh. She's been managing the legal affairs for Brown Family Restaurants for 15 years. The blood drained completely from Derek's face as the words hit him. Brown Family Restaurants. Brown Family Restaurants, his last name. Restaurants. My business. Our empire. Margaret, would you mind explaining to my son exactly what he's about to inherit? And that's when Derek's entire world collapsed. Margaret Walsh opened her briefcase with the practiced efficiency of someone who delivered life-changing news hundreds of times. Mr. Derek Brown, she said formally. I'm Margaret Walsh, senior partner at Walsh & Associates. Your father has retained our firm to handle the transfer of Brown Family Restaurants to you as primary beneficiary. Derek's voice came out as a croak. Brown Family? What? Brown Family Restaurants. Margaret repeated clearly. A hospitality corporation consisting of 22 restaurant locations across Vermont, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts. Current enterprise valuation, $18.2 million. The restaurant had gone completely silent. Even the kitchen noise seemed muted. 50 people were witnessing the moment Derek's reality collapsed. That's impossible, Derek whispered. Margaret removed a bound document from her briefcase. This is the most recent business valuation, completed January 8th, 2025. Would you like me to review the assets? She didn't wait for an answer. Real estate holdings, $12.4 million. Equipment and fixtures, $2.1 million. Inventory and goodwill, $3.7 million. Current liquid assets held in business accounts, $4.7 million. Derek was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. Dad, this is some kind of mistake. You can't own restaurants? I finished softly. Derek, what did you think I did for 34 years? Construction. You said construction. No, son. You said construction. You decided I'd work construction because it fit your story better. Tony Rodriguez appeared at Margaret's shoulder, as if summoned. Mr. Brown, I hate to interrupt, but the evening deposit is ready for your review. He handed me a leather portfolio containing the day's receipts. Gross revenue today was $11,847 across all 3 Burlington locations. The new spring menu is performing exceptionally well. Derek watched me flip through the daily reports like they were written in a foreign language. Mr. Brown, Tony continued, should I proceed with the Manchester location lease renewal? The landlord accepted our terms, 5-year extension at $8,200 monthly. I nodded. Approved? Make sure legal reviews the final paperwork. Tony smiled professionally. Of course, sir. Have a good evening. As Tony walked away, Derek found his voice. That man, he calls you Mr. Brown. He calls me Mr. Brown because I am Mr. Brown. I'm his boss, Derek. I've been his boss for 4 years. Margaret cleared her throat gently. Mr. Brown, shall we proceed with the inheritance documentation? Given your medical situation, time is unfortunately a factor. My medical situation. The words hung in the air like smoke. Derek's eyes widened. What medical situation? I'd protected him from this truth for 5 months. But protection time was over. Pancreatic cancer, I said simply. Diagnosed October 15th, 2024. 6-month prognosis. We're currently at month 5. The color drained completely from Derek's face. 6 months? Dad, why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't want to burden you while I arranged your inheritance. I wanted to handle the business transition quietly, then tell you everything together. Margaret nodded sympathetically. Your father has been incredibly thoughtful about succession planning. The inheritance documents ensure you'll receive full ownership with minimal tax implications. Ownership of what, exactly? Derek's voice was barely audible. Everything, I said. Every restaurant, every piece of property, every business account. The apartment you live in, I own the building. The BMW lease you're so proud of? Paid through our corporate account. Derek's hands were shaking now. The monthly payments you send me aren't charity, Derek. They're draws against your future inheritance. You've been living off the profits from Brown family restaurants for 4 years. The revelation hit him like a physical blow. 4 years. Margaret consulted her documents. According to our records, your father has transferred $150,400 to your personal account since March 2021. All payments were categorized as family transition allowances for tax purposes. Family transition allowances. Derek repeated the words like he was learning a new language. I leaned forward slightly. Derek, every month when you received that money, what did you think it was? I thought you were struggling financially and I was helping you by accepting it. The irony was so complete it almost hurt to breathe. Derek thought he was helping me by accepting money from my business empire. You thought I was struggling? You never talked about money. You dressed plainly, drove an old truck, lived simply. I thought you were barely getting by on Social Security. I dressed plainly because I spent 12 hours a day in restaurant kitchens. I drove an old truck because it was reliable. I lived simply because I've never needed to impress anyone. Margaret interjected gently. Mr. Brown, the legal timeline requires... Of course. I looked around the restaurant. My restaurant, at the faces still watching our family drama. Derek, this establishment, Brown's Steakhouse, was our 8th location, opened in 1995. Everything you see here I built... Derek followed my gaze around the dining room like he was seeing it for the first time. The hostess who seated us? Sarah. I hired her 2 years ago. The waiter who served us? Marcus. I approved his last raise in December. The general manager who just reviewed today's receipts? Tony Rodriguez. I recruited him from Boston in 2021. Each revelation hit Derek like another punch. They all know you. They all work for me, Derek. Which means after the inheritance transfer, they'll all work for you. Margaret opened another folder. The transition includes complete management teams, established vendor relationships, proven operational systems, and fully trained staff across all 22 locations. 22 restaurants, Derek whispered. 22 successful restaurants, I corrected. Brown Family Restaurants employs 347 people across 3 states. Last year's gross revenue was $23.7 million. Net profit was $2.3 million. Derek was staring at the numbers like they might change if he looked hard enough. Dad, I had no idea. No, Derek, you had no interest. Every time I tried to discuss business or the future, you changed the subject. Every time someone asked about my work, you deflected. You decided I was embarrassing, so you stopped listening. The truth was settling over him like heavy snow. I called you confused, in front of all these people. Yes, you did. I said you were making up stories about being important. Yes, I told them you were living in a fantasy. All of that, in front of my employees, my customers, and my attorney. Derek looked around the restaurant with new eyes. Every person who'd witnessed his cruelty now knew exactly who he'd been attacking. The successful businessman he'd been ashamed of. The dying father who'd been preparing to give him everything. The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds. Derek sat frozen, processing the magnitude of what he'd just learned. Around us, the restaurant remained perfectly quiet, every diner absorbed in our family's moment of truth. Finally, Derek spoke. Dad, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. If you'd just told me. Told you what, Derek? That I owned restaurants, I tried. You dismissed it as construction or something. That I was successful? You decided success meant embarrassment. Margaret Walsh cleared her throat diplomatically. Mr. Brown, given the circumstances, how would you like to proceed with the inheritance documentation? It was the question Derek should have asked months ago. Now it carried weight he couldn't have imagined. I looked at my son. Really looked at him. The expensive shirt I'd unknowingly paid for. The watch I'd bought him for graduation. The confidence that came from financial security he'd never earned. Derek, I said quietly, do you remember what you just told this entire restaurant about me? His face crumpled. Dad, please. I was wrong. I was so wrong. You told them I was confused and delusional, that I lived in a fantasy world, that you took care of me financially. I know, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. You apologized to my employee for my behavior. You explained to my customers that I was sick and didn't understand where I was. Derek was crying now. Actual tears in front of 50 strangers. I'll make it right. I'll tell everyone the truth. The truth? I leaned back in my chair. The truth is that you've been so ashamed of your father that you never bothered to learn who he actually was. Margaret watched this exchange with professional neutrality, her pen poised over legal documents worth $18.2 million. Mr. Brown, she said gently, the inheritance paperwork can be modified based on tonight's revelations. Derek's head snapped up. Modified how? I studied my son's face. Fear was replacing shame. The reality was sinking in. Everything he'd just inherited could disappear as quickly as he'd learned about it. Derek, in 8 to 12 weeks when I'm gone, what did you think was going to happen? I didn't think about it. I thought you had some savings, maybe a small life insurance policy. You thought I'd leave you with funeral expenses and nothing else. I guess I thought I'd take care of everything, handle the arrangements, pay the bills. With what money? Derek's voice dropped to a whisper. Mine. Your money? Derek, you just learned that your money has been my money for 4 years. What were you planning to take care of me with? The question exposed the final layer of Derek's delusion. He'd been planning to take care of his poor father using money his father had been giving him. Margaret interjected carefully. Mr. Brown, legally speaking, inheritance modifications require careful consideration. Tonight's events could certainly influence the distribution of assets. What does that mean? Derek asked urgently. It means, I said slowly, that your behavior tonight has consequences.
Tony Rodriguez reappeared at our table, carrying a small silver tray. "Mr. Brown, tonight's final numbers." He set down a printed summary.
Total revenue across all locations, $47,293, your highest Saturday on record.
Derek stared at the numbers. $47,000 in one day, from restaurants he'd never known existed. "Tony," I said, "I'd like you to meet my son, Derek. Derek, this is Tony Rodriguez, general manager of our flagship location." Tony extended his hand professionally. "Mr. Derek, I've heard so much about you. Your father is incredibly proud of your achievements." Derek shook Tony's hand like he was in a trance. "He talks about me all the time. During our Tuesday planning meetings, he's always sharing updates about your career progress." "Tuesday meetings? Every Tuesday at 10 a.m., Tony confirmed. "Your father reviews operations, approves major decisions, meets with department heads. He's very hands-on." Derek looked at me with fresh understanding. "That's why you were always busy on Tuesday mornings." "I told you I had appointments." "I thought you meant doctor appointments."
Sometimes I did, but mostly I meant business appointments. Margaret had been quietly organizing documents during this exchange. "Mr. Brown, shall we proceed with the original inheritance plan, or would you prefer to implement modifications based on recent developments?" The power in that question was absolute. With a few words, I could either give Derek everything or leave him with nothing. Derek understood this completely. "Dad, please. Whatever you decide, I deserve it. But I want you to know that I'm sorry. Not just sorry I got caught, but sorry for who I've been." I watched my son's face carefully. The arrogance was gone. The shame was real. But was the understanding deep enough to matter? "Derek, what do you think you deserve?" "Nothing," he said immediately. "I deserve nothing. I've been taking your money while being ashamed of you. I've been living off your success while dismissing your achievements. I called you confused and delusional in front of your own employees." The honesty was a start, but understanding consequences and accepting them were different things. "Margaret," I said finally, "proceed with the original inheritance documents." Derek's relief was visible. "Dad, thank you. I swear I'll—" With one modification, the relief vanished. "Derek will inherit everything as planned, but the transfer includes a condition." Margaret nodded, already making notes. "What condition, Mr. Brown?" "Derek must work in the restaurants for 1 full year before taking ownership. Starting Monday morning, 6 a.m. shift, Burlington location. Minimum wage." Derek's mouth fell open. "Minimum wage. You'll learn every position. Kitchen prep, dishwashing, serving, hosting, management. You'll understand what 347 employees do every day to generate the money you've been spending." Tony Rodriguez was nodding approvingly. "Excellent idea, Mr. Brown. I'll personally oversee his training." "And Derek," I continued, "during that year the monthly payments stop. You'll live on what you earn like everyone else." Derek was processing rapidly. "So I'll make, what, maybe $25,000 for the year? If you work hard, if you show up on time, if you treat customers and coworkers with respect. What about my apartment, my car lease? Your BMW gets returned Monday. Your apartment rent comes out of your wages. You'll learn to budget on a working person's income." The justice was perfect. Derek would inherit an empire, but only after experiencing life without the privileges he'd taken for granted. Margaret was writing quickly. "This is actually excellent legal structure. Mr. Derek's operational experience will make him a more effective owner and protect the business from mismanagement." "Dad," Derek said quietly, "what if I can't do it? What if I'm terrible at restaurant work?" "Then you'll learn why you should respect the people who can." Derek nodded slowly. "And if I complete the year? Full ownership transfers on your first anniversary. 22 restaurants, all assets, complete control." "And if I don't complete the year?" I looked around the restaurant one more time. At the employees who'd witnessed Derek's cruelty. At the customers who'd seen him humiliate his dying father. At Margaret, who'd watched our family drama unfold over legal documents worth millions. Then the business goes to charity and you go back to your marketing job, without the monthly supplements. Derek understood. He'd have 1 year to prove he could earn what he'd been given, 1 year to demonstrate respect for work he'd dismissed, 1 year to show he understood the value of what he was inheriting. "I'll do it," he said firmly. "Dad, I'll do whatever it takes." "Good. Tony will expect you Monday at 6 a.m. sharp. Bring work clothes and a humble attitude." Tony smiled. "Don't worry, Mr. Derek. We'll teach you everything you need to know." Margaret finished her modifications and looked up. Mr. Brown, this creates an excellent transition structure. Are you ready to sign? I picked up the pen. After 5 months of trying to protect Derek from reality, it was time to make him face it. But as I signed the documents that would change both our lives, I felt something unexpected. Hope. Maybe it wasn't too late for Derek to become the man I'd raised him to be. Word travels fast in a city like Burlington, especially when it involves $18 million in public humiliation. By Sunday morning, Derek's world had shifted completely off its axis. His phone started buzzing at 7 a.m. Jenny from work, the same Jenny who'd recommended this great restaurant, had somehow heard about Saturday night's dinner revelation. Derek? Oh my God, is it true? Your dad owns Brown's Steakhouse? He owns all of them, Jenny. 22 restaurants. Silence. Then, all of them? Derek, Brown Family Restaurants is huge. They're in every business journal.
Your father is like a restaurant mogul. Restaurant mogul. Derek had spent 4 years calling me a retired construction worker while business journals were writing about my success. Jenny, I have to ask you something. When you recommended Brown's Steakhouse, did you know who owned it? Of course I knew. Everyone in business knows Samson Brown. He's a legend in New England hospitality. Derek, how did you not know your own father owned? Derek hung up. The answer was too humiliating to explain. By noon, Derek's social media was exploding. Someone had filmed parts of Saturday night's confrontation. The video was grainy, the audio unclear, but the basic story was spreading fast. Arrogant son humiliates restaurant owner father. Doesn't know father owns the restaurant. The local business community was buzzing. Samson Brown's son had publicly called him delusional and confused while sitting in Brown's flagship location.
The irony was too perfect not to share. Derek's LinkedIn profile suddenly looked pathetic. Regional marketing director seemed insignificant compared to owner Brown Family Restaurants, $23.7 million annual revenue. His corporate colleagues were reaching out with a mixture of shock and embarrassment. How had they spent years networking with Derek while his father was running a hospitality empire they'd all heard of? Monday morning arrived like a cold slap. Derek stood outside Brown's Steakhouse at 5:55 a.m., wearing jeans and a t-shirt, holding a paper bag with work clothes Tony had specified. The restaurant looked different in pre-dawn darkness. Bigger, more substantial, more real. Tony unlocked the back door precisely at 6 a.m. Morning, Derek. Ready for your first day? As ready as I can be. Good attitude. Leave your phone in the locker. Restaurant work requires full attention. Derek's phone had been buzzing constantly anyway. Text messages from friends, missed calls from colleagues, LinkedIn notifications from people suddenly wanting to connect with Samson Brown's son. The first lesson was immediate and humbling. Restaurant prep work was harder than anything Derek had ever done. 40 pounds of potatoes need peeling, said Carlos, the prep cook. Machine's broken, so it's all by hand. Should take you about 3 hours. 3 hours. Derek's hands were blistered after 1 hour. His back ached after 2. By hour 3, he understood something fundamental about the people he'd never bothered to notice. They worked incredibly hard for very little money. Lunch rush was a revelation. Derek had eaten in restaurants thousands of times without seeing the chaos behind the kitchen doors. Orders flying in, tickets piling up, servers running, cooks shouting, dishes crashing. His job was simple. Wash dishes, bus tables, take out trash. Simple but endless. Derek, table 12 needs clearing. Derek, we're out of clean glasses. Derek, grease trap needs emptying. By 3 p.m., Derek was exhausted. His expensive watch, the graduation gift I'd bought him, was soaked with dishwater and food scraps. A customer complaint brought the day's biggest lesson. "Excuse me," said a well-dressed woman. "This young man was very rude when clearing our table. He seemed irritated, like we were bothering him." Tony apologized professionally, then pulled Derek aside. "What happened at table 8? "Nothing. I just cleared their dishes." Without making eye contact? Without saying anything? Derek realized he'd been treating customers the way he'd always treated service workers, as invisible people whose feelings didn't matter. "I didn't think." "That's the problem, Derek. You didn't think. These people are paying our salaries, your salary. They deserve respect and attention." The second customer complaint came an hour later. Derek had rolled his eyes when an elderly man asked for extra napkins. Tony's patience was wearing thin. "Derek, step outside." On the loading dock, Tony delivered the reality check Derek needed. "Your father built this business on treating every customer like family, every employee like they matter, every interaction like it counts." "I'm trying, Tony." "No, you're enduring. There's a difference. You think this work is beneath you."
Derek started to protest, then stopped. Tony was right. You want to inherit 22 restaurants? Prove you can handle one shift without acting like the customers and coworkers are inconveniencing you. That evening, Derek drove home in his father's old pickup truck. The BMW had been returned that morning, as promised. The apartment that had seemed spacious and modern now felt like an expensive burden he couldn't afford. His bank account showed the reality of minimum wage work, $58 for 10 hours. After taxes, maybe $45.
For the first time in 4 years, Derek calculated his actual expenses without my monthly supplements. Rent, $1,850. Car payment, $0, returned. Food, $400, estimated. Utilities, $200. Phone, $120. Insurance, $300. Total, $2,870 monthly. Working full-time at minimum wage, Derek would make approximately $1,200 monthly after taxes. The math was brutal and immediate. He couldn't afford his lifestyle on restaurant wages. Tuesday brought a phone call that changed everything. Derek Brown, this is Jennifer Morrison from TechFlow Solutions. We need to discuss your employment status. Derek's stomach dropped. His promotion, his raise, his corporate identity, all of it suddenly felt fragile. Jennifer, what's wrong? We've seen the social media posts about Saturday night. The company is concerned about the optics. The optics? Derek, you publicly humiliated your father, who turns out to be a prominent business owner in our target market. Several potential clients have reached out asking if we endorse that kind of behavior. Derek felt the walls closing in. It was a personal family matter. A personal family matter that happened in public and was filmed. Derek, we're placing you on administrative leave while we review the situation. Administrative leave. Corporate speak for, you're probably fired. For how long? That depends on how this situation resolves itself. If your father files any complaints, if more videos surface, if our clients continue expressing concerns. Derek understood. His corporate career was hanging by a thread, and the thread was held by the father he'd publicly humiliated. Wednesday morning, Derek showed up for his second day of restaurant work with a completely different perspective. He needed this job, not as a learning experience or a condition of inheritance, but as actual survival. For the first time in his adult life, Derek Brown was entirely dependent on his own work ethic. The irony was perfect. To inherit my empire, he first had to learn how to live without it. 3 weeks into Derek's restaurant education, I received the call I'd been expecting. Dad, it's Derek. Can we talk? I was reviewing quarterly reports in my home office, the same reports Derek had dismissed as old man busy work just months earlier. Now he was calling from his dinner break at Brown's Steakhouse, exhausted from a 12-hour shift. Of course, son. How are you holding up? I'm tired, Dad. Really tired, but I need to tell you something. I waited. I understand now. Not just the work, but everything. What you built, what it means, what I was throwing away. Derek's voice had changed. The corporate smoothness was gone, replaced by something raw and more honest. 3 weeks ago, I thought restaurant work was beneath me. Tonight, I helped Carlos train a new prep cook, and I felt proud. Actual pride in doing something well. The transformation wasn't complete, but it was real. Tony Rodriguez had been sending me daily reports on Derek's progress. The first week had been rough. Complaints from customers, attitude problems, several near walkouts. But something had shifted after Derek's corporate job disappeared. When the choice became work hard or starve, Derek chose work. Carlos taught me to dice onions properly today, Derek continued. It took me 2 hours to get it right, but when I finally did, he smiled and said, "Good job, Derek. I haven't felt accomplishment like that in years." Pride in honest work. Maybe I'd raised him right after all. Dad, I have a confession. I whispered those things at dinner because I was afraid. Afraid of what? Afraid that you actually were more successful than me. My whole identity was built on being the achievement in our family. If you were successful too, what did that make me? The honesty was painful but necessary. Derek had needed to be the only success story to feel valuable. So I convinced myself you were just a sick old man who sometimes got confused. It was easier than admitting I didn't know my own father. I felt the familiar chest tightness that came with emotional conversations, but also something else. Hope. Derek, what have you learned about our employees? That they're incredible. Maria works 2 jobs to support 3 kids and still arrives early every shift. Carlos sends half his paycheck to his mother in Guatemala. Sarah's putting herself through nursing school while working full-time. Derek was learning names, stories, circumstances.
For the first time in his life, he was seeing service workers as complete human beings. "And what have you learned about the work itself?" "That it's harder than anything I ever did in corporate, and more honest. When you do restaurant work well, people get fed. When you do it poorly, people go hungry. There's no hiding behind presentations or meetings or quarterly projections. Direct consequences, real impact." Derek was discovering the satisfaction of tangible results. "Dad, I want to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Always. How much time do we actually have left?" The question I'd been dreading and hoping for in equal measure. "Dr. Carter's latest estimate is 6 to 10 weeks. The progression has been faster than we hoped." Silence on Derek's end. When he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. 6 to 10 weeks to learn 34 years of lessons. "Derek, you don't need to learn everything. You just need to learn enough to treat people right. I want to spend time with you. Real time. Not just work conversations, but father-son time." For 4 years, Derek had been too busy or embarrassed for father-son time. Now, with deadline pressure, it had become precious. "I'd like that very much. Can we have dinner Sunday? Not at one of the restaurants, just at home? I'll cook." Derek offering to cook for me felt like a small miracle. The son who'd whispered harsh corrections about my fork usage now wanted to prepare food for me personally. "I'd love that, Derek." "And Dad, I want to learn about Mom, about how you built the business, about decisions I'll need to make. I want to understand your legacy before it becomes my responsibility." Legacy. Derek was finally ready to receive what I'd been trying to give him. We talked for another 30 minutes. Derek told me about learning to clean grease traps, about mastering the dishwasher timing, about the satisfaction of a perfectly bussed table. Work he'd once considered beneath him had become a source of genuine pride. When we hung up, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. Derek was becoming the man I'd hoped to raise. It had taken public humiliation, financial consequences, and honest work to get him there, but transformation was happening. Maybe we'd have enough time for him to really understand what he was inheriting. Maybe 6 to 10 weeks would be enough to rebuild 34 years of relationship. And maybe, just maybe, when I was gone, Derek would remember his father not as the man who embarrassed him, but as the man who loved him enough to teach him respect. If you're listening to this story, call your parents tonight. Tell them you're proud of them. Ask about their work, their dreams, their sacrifices. Time is the only thing none of us can earn back. Don't waste it on whispered cruelties or public humiliations. Don't waste it on pride.